I made, right, and then I'll pause.
I'm really sorry that Michelle isn't here today to share her reflection. It's a beautiful piece. It's at once deeply personal and wonderfully universal. I'm going to read this in Michelle's voice, so know that the first person in this is Michelle. My grandpa Keith took his own life. It was 2022, right after my 25th birthday. It felt like my life was suddenly split in two, before it happened and after it happened. My family felt the same way. Everything had changed. If you've ever been through a loss like that, you know grief doesn't come in neat packages. It comes with sharp edges. And grief can bring out the worst in people when they're hurting. We all reacted differently. Some with silence, some with anger, some with distance. It would have been so easy to stay in my corner in Maine, to keep the conversations on the phone polite, to avoid the rooms where the grief was thick in the air. And for a while I did, but then I didn't. I traveled toward the grief and I booked a flight to Minnesota, and I walked into those rooms. I stayed with my family, my father, my mother, my brothers, my grandmother. We shared meals no one really tasted. We sat together in living rooms where the air felt heavy with hurt. Sometimes we cried, sometimes we yelled, sometimes we sat in silence, not knowing what to say, but knowing that leaving the room would hurt more. I remember sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, the same table where my grandfather had once told me stories from his childhood, and feeling how wrong it was that he wasn't there. There were no answers, no way to tie the story up neatly. But there was presence, there was us, and somehow that mattered. That experience is part of why I give so much of myself to Pride in Aging Rhode Island. My grandfather never identified as LGBTQ+, but I see him in the people I meet there. I see him in the elders who carry decades of resilience, in the quiet battles they've fought, in the way some have spent a lifetime feeling unseen. And I see him in those moments, those brave, tender moments, when someone trusts me enough to share something real, even when it's painful. The truth is, it's not all celebration. Sometimes it's about loss, about fear, about being alone for too long. And the work, my work there, is to stay, to lean in, to make sure no one's story is met with silence. That's also why being here in this room at UUCSC matters so much to me, because this is a place where we don't look away, where we choose to lean in, where we practice showing up for one another even when it's messy. When someone is grieving or angry or telling a truth that's hard to hear, we don't rush to change the subject. We stay, we witness, we hold the space, even when the air in the room feels heavy. The world can't afford for us to be passive consumers of community, to just sit back and wait for the easy moments. The love we're looking for, the connection we long for, is so often sitting right inside the tough stuff. And here's the thing, it's not easy to move toward what hurts. It takes courage, it takes patience, it takes a willingness to be uncomfortable. But over and over, I've found that's where the grace is. That's where the healing begins. Please rise in body or spirit to sing hymn number 396, I Know That.
It was just about 22 years ago when, oh boy, Zoom is doing something funny. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. We'll start over. It was just about 22 years ago when I spoke to the Reverend Margot Campbell Gross, one of the co-ministers of the congregation where I became a Unitarian Universalist. She had just got back from summer vacation and was looking all bronzed and relaxed. I took her aside and I said, I want to be a minister. I said it whispering. Honestly, I was a little worried that somebody would overhear me and hold me to it. The thought of ministry was terrifying enough, but then I heard her response. No, don't do it. I stepped back a couple feet and then less loudly, she said, really, don't do it. Don't do it unless you absolutely must. Try everything else first, and if that doesn't work, then think about ministry. The shock must have shown in my face because she became very quiet and said, ministry will tear your heart out. You can't imagine how lonely and isolating it is. That made sense to me because, it actually made no sense to me because at that point, if there was one thing that I believed in, it was the priesthood of all believers. The priesthood of all believers is a commonly held belief among Christians, accepted by every Protestant denomination. It's the understanding that every person who subscribes to the faith is a minister of that doctrine. It rises up out of Martin Luther's 16th century assertion that we all have access to God and that it need not be mediated through a priest, through an ordained priest. And that access gives us both the privilege and the responsibility of priesthood. The concept is at the core of religious humanism, the idea that we test our faith against our own experience and our own understanding. For religious liberals like us in the 21st century, that can include faith in God, but more likely it's about faith in humanity and the order of the universe. So what does that mean for a non-doctrinal religion like Unitarian Universalism, where we value ministry more than priesthood? Ministry is caring for the people and the institutions that care for us. Priesthood is practicing and safeguarding the rituals that define us. It means that we take responsibility for the spiritual life of the community by pledging and not using our gifts as a kind of ransom for getting what we want. Deciding how that money will be spent, caring for the structure, the grounds, the education and gathering spaces, dedicating ourselves to the children and their parents, getting out into the community to share the good news that even though we aren't perfect, we do our best to live by our values, focused on protecting democracy, justice, and the environment. In liberal traditions like ours, preaching is the responsibility and privilege of not just the hired minister, but anyone with ideas they want to share responsibly. That's why in Unitarian Universalism, a full-time minister preaches only 3 times per month. It gives the lay leaders the opportunity to share their thoughts and even challenge the ideas preached by the minister. And this is the very definition of shared ministry. Almost 4 years ago when I was interviewed by the board of directors before they hired me, they had a lot of different ideas about what they expected, what they could ask from me. But they were very clear about one thing. They were not interested in a priest who would unilaterally determine the theology that guides you in community. And they certainly did not want a CEO-style minister who effectively took control of all decisions regarding the practices, budget, organizational structure, mission, and vision of the congregation. And that was fine with me. I'm not interested in being the proprietor of any congregation. So I talked about shared ministry, which I believe in with my whole being. Sharing ministry among all of us means that while the mission and bylaws may be what own the congregation, everyone has a responsibility for living out that mission and making the decisions and doing the work that keep it alive for the greater good of its members and the wider world. Sharing ministry means that we are all ministers serving the mission of this congregation and the values of Unitarian Universalism. Sharing ministry means doing things even when they feel thankless for the good of the congregation, like coordinating coffee hour, which we all agree is good for the congregation, but brings so little in return for the people who do the hard work, like setting up and cleaning up. Sharing ministry is being on the board or other committee and engaging in the tough conversations like keeping the books and setting the budget and figuring out how to make the parapet stop leaking without replacing the entire roof. Little things like that. Sharing ministry means living together with the systems that may no longer work but are too entrenched to really change in any meaningful way. Theologian and memoirist Barbara Taylor Brown says that to be a minister is to know that things are not as they should be, and yet to care for them the way they are. Often that feels like an impossible, thankless task, condemning us to disappointment. And that is a universal truth about ministry, tending to the congregation, the community, and the whole world, knowing that it's broken, striving to fix it, loving it as it is, and bearing witness to everything, and trying to be mindful of our judgments in the process. Mindful of the challenge, my colleague Jeremy Langle, executive minister of the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, asks, so what do? We preach, we pray, we show up. We embrace our differences, religious or otherwise, because we understand that God embraces all of us. We set aside faith-based narratives and lean into God's story of love and compassion. We recognize that our fight has never been about preserving the status quo, the dominating narratives of oppression and empire, but that it has always been about the renewing of our minds. I want to honor Jeremy's words, but I also want to engage in a little UU translating here. You can say the universe embraces each of us, that we lean into life's story of love and compassion, because we know for a fact as Unitarian Universalists, even though it's hard to face sometimes, that our fight has never been about preserving the status quo, but instead about renewing our minds. The hardest, most spiritually and emotionally challenging work we do here together is the work that renews our minds, restores our faith in the human capacity for love and compassion. And that's not easy. It requires showing up, praying, preaching, accepting things the way they are while still moving toward a vision of the way the world could be if we stay involved, connected, and open-hearted. And that's the paradox of ministry. When you acknowledge your dread, your fear, your anxiety, disappointment, all of it, and hold it tenderly to your chest and walk straight into the toughest situations, knowing that things aren't the way they should be. Whether you're ordained or not, that is ministry. When Michelle's grandpa Keith ended his own life and she and her family went into mourning together. They came out on the other side stronger, more connected, because those horrible, unthinkable situations are where the biggest love is. It's in that crucible of pain that our bonds are forged. That's the kind of love that's rooted in grace. And grace is one of those concepts that is often hard for Unitarian Universalists. The word feels like it's dripping with Christian privilege, the kind of privilege that grows from a belief that you're loved by God more than others. But that's not grace. That's entitlement. That's false entitlement. My UU colleague, Chance Hunter, describes it beautifully. Grace is getting more than we deserve. Grace can feel like a wave of relief or a spike of pain, but it always leads to the path of more hope, more trust, more love. This is the core of the Universalist message. There is always more than enough grace to go around. There's no amount of good deeds we can do, and there's no magic prayer we can pray that will guarantee we receive grace. We receive grace not because we deserve it, but because the universe is fundamentally a generous place. That there is life at all is a sign of grace. That there are people like us walking around on the earth after billions of years of biological accidents, that surely is grace. For more than 20 years now, I have been trying to share the core of my theology, a belief that paradox and grace are endlessly intertwined. It makes sense in my head, in my heart, and in my soul, and yet I can't really explain it in a way that doesn't make me sound confused and like I'm talking in circles. Brennan Manning was an American author who was defrocked from Catholic priesthood. He's best known for his best-selling book, The Ragamuffin Gospel. He once wrote, "When I get honest, I admit I am a bundle of paradoxes. I believe in doubt, I hope and get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good, and I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. I'm trusting and I'm suspicious. And I'm honest and I still play games. Aristotle said that I am a rational animal. I say that I am an angel with an incredible capacity for beer." So he's probably also talking in circles, but it makes sense to me. So as I've been engaging in my vocation and in my incredible capacity for fried chicken and coleslaw, I've had a lot of time to reflect on Reverend Margot's response when I told her I wanted to be a minister. She was right. Vocational ministry can be isolating and lonely. People share their deepest fears, doubts, and shame with you, and you keep their secrets. You rarely get a chance to celebrate holidays with friends and family. Moving stinks. Every few years, it seems like you have to pick up sticks and go somewhere else, starting all over again. And making any real friends until that last year before you have to go can leave you feeling like there's no point in bothering with a personal life. Meanwhile, people are people. They blame you for things you don't like, and none of us are at our best when we're struggling with fear or anxiety. And sometimes we can be harsh with each other. But the paradox of grace is what keeps me from being isolated and lonely. Keeps me personally from feeling isolated and lonely. Because I keep showing up for the hard stuff. I keep seeing the humanity, the frailty, the vulnerability, and the incredible strength and tenacity of every single one of us that does this work together. Shared ministry is where the paradox of ministry lives. Shared ministry is where grace grows. We celebrate our proudest achievements and our aha moments with each other. We create traditions and rituals with more than just our biological families. And new connections between congregants and ministers when we leave and start again. It allows for fresh starts and ways to begin to correct the mistakes of the past and maybe even heal from them. The good news is that as a ministry of all believers in the human experience, we get to engage in this work together. We get to show up for the hard times. We get to swallow our pride every now and then for the greater good. And maybe even feign interest every now and then, especially when the minister seems to be talking in circles. When we get to experience grace together and the good and the bad rolled into one confusing mess that somehow makes us stronger, wiser, and more capable of deeper love. So here's a really tiny example of how grace works through the paradox of ministry. So the choir knows this. I can't stand the song Let It Be a Dance We Do. Seriously, it's so bad. My disdain for this song is so bad that I literally banned it for 6 years from my last congregation. It was the only unilateral, tyrannical executive order I ever made in 20 years of ministry. But people love that song. I know a lot of you love that song. And so today it fits the theme. So I resist cringing and I say with a smile, please rise now as you're willing and able and open